Amen. All right, Pastor RJ, what do you got for me today?
Well, before we get into the questions about the text or anything, something that I told to Josh earlier this morning, he came rolling in here. Looks like he was dragged straight out of bed, just woke up, eyelids half open. And it turns out you're up to what, 2 in the morning, working on all those little slides.
Yeah, we went through one of them.
That you got one of today. But did you guys get the impression that he was all hyped up once he got up here and started actually getting into it? Like, it felt like somebody hit fast forward on you.
Yeah.
So I just, did you do anything special between when I left you in the office and when you opened your mouth?
Red Bull. 4 cans of Red Bull.
Just mainlined it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Every service, or every Sunday before service, Pastor Lee and I get together and pray. And that generally has a real calming effect on me. So that's that. If we're gonna give credit to anything, we're gonna say that God is always faithful to kind of bring stuff back into balance right when it needs to be. Though I would not recommend sermon prep to anyone that involves being up till 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. Yeah. That is a bad policy. But I keep trying to find slides. I had really great slides for today. Okay. I had one of an archery target. I had one of a Jewish wedding festival. Mm-hmm. I had one of an ecosystem that showed how water goes through the system and it cleanses its.
So anybody that wants to come back to the office afterwards and see all the slides you spent so much time on, please feel free.
I was like, these are going to be great. Yeah.
So if you're watching online and you're tech savvy, what's your email? Give me your email. Have them send you your slides.
My email's really hard. It's rev, R-E-V,
okay.
period, strunk @gmail.com.
Okay. There you go. I forgot it already, but they have it recorded, so we'll be okay.
That's what the
Well, I ask about your energy level just to kind of bring us into the fact. I mean, you got through 15 and 16.
Yeah.
In an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I'm just looking at it and just mapping it out real quickly. I mean, that's like 3 months worth of work there.
It could be.
Okay, that's three. That's at least 10 sermons.
Oh,
at least 10.
If you break it down, but all of the scriptures like that, right? Yeah. If you break it down and you tear it apart, you can spend years on very small amounts of stuff. And the temptation is there to do so. And temptation is probably not the right word because that makes it sound like it's a bad thing. I would love to do so, but I know. So there's 2 things. One, I know that that to get the larger arc of the message, sometimes you have to pull back. Right? It's like being in an airplane and surveying the countryside from the aerial view. You see it differently. So there's that. And then we're getting close to the end of the year. And when the end of the year comes, it's going to be time to re-engage a different text. And I know that. So I'm trying to get through Matthew before the end of the year. Spoiler alert, trying to get through Matthew before the end of the year. Yeah. Jesus will make the Pharisees more and more mad until finally they have him killed. And then he's gonna be dead, and then he's gonna be alive again, and he's gonna be like, get the job done. That's what's coming. Get
the job done. That's just what we're gonna title the rest of the series.
The rest of Matthew is titled, Get the Job Done.
So, and that actually, as organic as it is a decent transition for us. So just to get us into the text right off the bat, verse 3. He answered them, and why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? And you said that was a good question to ask. Do our religious traditions line up with the text of Scripture?
Absolutely.
So take us a little deeper, like how you approach asking that question here for Pine Run.
So G.K. Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, talks about how tradition is the living faith of dead saints. So it is what is Tradition is what is passed to us from those who've gone before us, right? That brings our faith to life. Stuff like the creeds, the Apostles' Creed is a good example. We do the Lord's Prayer every Sunday. It's a tradition that kind of links us to our past in Chesterton's kind of structure of the statement. So he says, tradition is the living faith of dead saints, and traditionalism is the dead faith of living saints. So the idea being that when you do stuff, not because it connects you with your faith, but because you just do it because it's tradition, that's just death. And so that kind of plays a lot into the thinking about this idea of what Jesus is saying. They had these traditions that were really just traditionalism. Okay. They weren't there to enrich the life of the believer, so that they would draw closer to the heart of God, so that they would reflect the character of God. It wasn't about getting closer to the heart of what the Torah prescribed. It was about having these loopholes for the Torah. Like last week when I was talking about with taxes, how in the 1950s, the tax code, like 2 pages was actual tax code, and then there was 10,000 and something pages of loopholes. Like the Pharisees, I did it again. Time. What is going on? The Pharisees.
So I was going to bring that up, but now we don't have to.
The Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the religious leaders were just creating loopholes. And it's because, in all honesty, as close as they were to the truth, they still couldn't see it, you know? I mean, that wasn't, we don't create loopholes in our life because we have real faith and we're trying to not practice it. We create loopholes in our life because our faith isn't real in the first place. And so we're just trying to keep up appearances. Yeah. And it's that whole thing later on where he says, it's not what goes into your body that defiles you. It's what comes out of your mouth that defiles you. Well, it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. It's what comes out of your mouth that defiles you. And with the point being, not that they were defiled because they said things that were bad, but that they were already defiled in the interior of their heart. And because of that, everything that came out was bad. That's what loopholes are. Loopholes are when the heart is toxic, you look for loopholes. You look for traditionalism. You look for religion.
So is that to say all tradition should be just forsaken? No. You know, if the previous generation did it, then we're going to do the opposite of it.
I thought I was just clear on that. No. No. As a matter of fact, we went through some of that with Pine Run as we were making the transition to the congregation that we are now. One of the things that we were trying to figure out is how do you hold in balance the traditions of our faith that are alive and active, the traditions of previous generations, and merge that with with what is new and fresh. Because the Bible talks about, for instance, music is a great example. The Bible talks about how God puts in our hearts a new song, right? Sing to the Lord a new song, the psalmist says. So a new song is a good thing and it honors God. But it also says in Proverbs not to move the ancient boundary stone, right? So you have these two different ideas there. And so as we were looking at music here at the church, and this is something that Eve and I spend a lot of time talking about, it was a question of how do we make sure that we bring both aspects, both the traditional, historical songs that we as a body of believers can say are a part of our shared history. Yes. How do we bring that in while at the same time bringing in new songs and new expressions of faith? And honestly, there is no good answer in the sense of like, there's no like cut and dry textbook. You know, you're not going to buy a book at the airport and says, you know, the perfect way to balance tradition and non-tradition. It's just something that you just have to let God kind of guide you every step of the way. And so sometimes there are things that need to be let go, and sometimes there are things that need to be clung to, and it's something you just kind of make that call as the Lord leads you.
I've always enjoyed the enjoyment versus idolization method.
Oh.
Is that a sacred cow? Is that something
Right,
that,
right.
that people themselves are idolizing above it, you know,
Right,
the pinnacle
right.
of Christ? If it is that case, then it has moved
Then
into
it's moved into a traditionalist. Yeah.
And I mean, that's not
traditionalism.
perfect, but it's a quick little
No, but
litmus
that's a
test
good
you can
one,
lay
yeah.
across it.
When long before I got here, let's look around right quick. Okay, so nobody here was here at the time I'm about to talk about. Long before I got here, this cross was brought in. The not the pastor before me or before him, 4 pastors ago. The Reverend Morrison was here. His son-in-law built that cross and hung it up on the wall for the church as a gift to the church. It has now been there for probably 30 years. So at this point, it's been there a really long time. So most people just assume it's always been there. In reality, that was put up to replace a portrait of Jesus that was up there before for decades. Now, not that the portrait of Jesus was bad. I mean, it was a nice portrait. And I mean, some people, of course, some people get concerned about the idol worship type thing of having pictures up, but we're already surrounded by stained glass. So
we're not going to go down that road
let's
today.
not go down that road, right? The point is, they had the picture up for years and years and years. And when it was presented, should that picture be changed, the response was so negative that the pastor had his son-in-law build the cross and put it up there. Because he said, obviously people are too attached to this picture. And
So whether or not you agree whether pictures are idols, that one was.
Yeah, that one had become an idol. Yeah, which is just fascinating to me. So yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good kind of litmus test. Can you live without this? If you can't live without it, it's an idol. My pastor John used to say, if you can't give something away, then you don't own it. It owns you.
Yes.
Same idea. That's funny how that wraps around.
So as far as traditions worth keeping, you did make a point to say that, at least in the past, within humanity, the idea of tending to, taking care of the elderly,
Right.
in their golden years of life was an expectation.
Right.
It wasn't an anomaly. Nowadays, you know, what do? We stuff them in a home somewhere and let somebody else worry about it? Like,
Yeah.
where is that traditional break? And maybe is that a tradition that the church should really be pushing within its congregations? Yeah, I told you we were getting heavy today. We were real light last week. We're getting heavy today.
So yeah, so here's the thing about that. Yes. Wow. Could you imagine buy up a couple of acres, build an old folks home? Church takes care of its own. Man. Yeah, no, something happened.
Sorry, board members, we just found you a new project. I apologize. My man.
I love you so much, Tim. So yeah, there is this thing there. There was this expectation. Now, granted, there weren't really old folks home back then, so it's a little different. But there was an expectation that you would take care of your family as they got older. They take care of you when you're young. You take care of them when they're old. But they also lived differently. Mm-hmm. So like everybody would live in like a house together, mm-hmm. right? So your household, it was expansive.
Yeah.
And so part of what happens in our current like modern experience is that you go back to like the Industrial Revolution And with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and factories, more and more people are leaving their homes to get work out of the home. And then that creates a situation where, like, mom and dad are both working outside the home. No one's watching the kids. So now you have to have a school so your kid has somewhere to go while mom and dad aren't there. Unless your kid goes to work in the factory too, but we made huge inroads towards keeping that from happening. Anyway, that's way beyond the scope of this conversation. But so, like, before that, everybody worked from home. Everybody was living basically at home. And even then, so up until like 100 years ago or so, even then, the older generation would often live with the younger generation. But as the Industrial Revolution took place, we began to shift from extended families living together in a single household to nuclear families, each kind of having their own household. And people began to migrate to where there were factories and away from their homes. And so that created this kind of situation where it became more and more difficult to take care of your parents when they aged.
Yeah.
I think a strong argument could be made for the fact that some of that has to do with the idea that the church did not teach people to value family over economic mobility.
Okay.
But there's a lot of complexity to that conversation. Like if we didn't have the Industrial Revolution, maybe families would still stay together longer. But without the Industrial Revolution, the progress that we've made in things like health and wellness and science in general would have never happened because all the people who ended up being scientists would have still been working on farms somewhere trying to, make sure there was enough food for the winter. So there's a complexity there. Anyway, so you bring that forward to like the last 40 or 50 years, and it's just become kind of a tradition of sorts that now the tradition is not that you take care of your family, but that you let someone else take care of them, right? In some cases, there's some necessity to that. Like there are some situations where because of mental handicaps or physical handicaps, there's just no way for a child to take care of their aging parent. Sometimes it's a financial situation, like you have kind of like having little kids, you have to work, and so somebody's got to take care of the kids. Well, with your aging parents, you've got to work, somebody's got to take care of them. So there's definitely nuance to how I want to respond to that question. I can't believe we're still on that one question. Anyway, sorry.
I can force transition us.
No, it's all right. It's all right, because here's my point. I'm almost done. Here's my point. The church needs to remember that God's heart is for the family. Amen. And that there is no substitute for that. So whether you're in a situation where you need to try and use like an old folks home, or you're in a situation where you can make the sacrifices and have your family live with you, those are individual kind of nuanced decisions. As long as what drives those decisions is the desire to honor God by reconciling, restoring, and keeping the family together. I've seen far too many people send their parents off to a home because of issues of bitterness and unforgiveness and laziness, when, frankly, they could have invested the time, but they wouldn't. And I think that grieves the heart of God.
I agree.
All right. So anyway, that was a very long answer.
That's okay. That's okay.
Ask me
That's
a sociological question.
That's the point of this.
right.
So we're gonna speed up a little bit here, catch us up. So we'll jump into verse 12. Then the disciples came and said to him, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?" So I know this question is going to be odd for my audience, but I'm going to ask you and let you take it. Should we be concerned when it comes to offending somebody? Should we avoid offense of somebody else at any cost?
Is there a reason you want to ask all the really long, complicated questions?
Yes, that's the point of this. That's why we do this.
All right, fine. So, Romans, what does Romans say? Romans chapter 11, I think it is. No, it's not 11. It's 14.
Where'd it go?
Help me out here. What, you can't read my mind?
No. I tried once. It stung.
Really? The weak brother, yeah. Is that 14? Thank you very much. All right, Romans chapter 14. As for the one who is weak in the faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes that he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. Let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. So, Paul says we should be concerned about not offending the, help me out here, okay, sometimes they are, but more importantly, the weaker brother. Don't offend the weaker brother. Don't set out to be offensive to those whose conscience will not allow them to fully embrace the freedom that they have in Christ. There are those, and we all know them, there are those who get hung up on certain things and they can't experience the fullness of freedom, right? So they just can't. And so you're not supposed to welcome them in just so you can berate them or try and fix them or try and dig the speck out of their eye. You know, you just accept the fact that there are those who are weaker. Don't seek to offend them. This is really important. The weaker brother. Were the scribes and the Pharisees the weaker brother? Think about that. See, that's really the key to all of this, is that even there with Paul, I have been in so many churches and I have been with so many Christians over the last 25 years who have used that passage to try and restrict the freedom of other believers by saying, well, you can't do that because it offends me. Mm-hmm. Well, but wait, I thought it was the weaker brother who's offended. So are you saying that you're the weaker brother, so I can't do fill in the blank because I'm going to offend you because you're the weaker brother? That's a really horrible argument to make, right? But no, I'm the stronger brother. So are you stronger because you're the one worried about being offended? And I thought it was the weaker brother who gets offended, right? You follow this? This is a big deal. Self-righteousness likes to masquerade itself as the one to whom everyone else should bow. You should not seek to offend the weaker brother. So if you know you got a guy who's weaker, cut him some slack, right? But be careful about subjecting yourself to those who are just looking for an excuse to use self-righteousness to control you. Dan, what were you going to say?
Well, there's a lot, but...
Well, that's good, because I've been talking a lot. It's your turn.
I think we're ready to punt it out to them
like
anyway.
The 99 or the 1.
Right.
That's the 1 needs some help.
Right.
The 99, they have each other right now.
't right. Oh, that's very good. I like that.
There's some other there, too, with the righteous, self-righteous, 1 Timothy 3. We touched on it a little bit last week, and you talked about it today, which was just spot on. That we got to take care of whether we're in a position of authority or back in was it Matthew 5, I think, if it's just us, put our gifts at the altar.
Right,
Take care
right.
of what we gotta take care of, kind of thing.
Yeah,
That's gonna get rid of all the toxicity.
that's right.
But the one is what what I was getting after here right now.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus looks for the one. Yeah, he wasn't really worried about the Pharisees. He was like, those vipers. And I don't care what those vipers think.
So that's within the context of brother or sister. What about outside of the faith?
Like, be careful not to offend the
Yeah,
those
the fact
outside.
that the claim of our faith is offensive
Right.
to the natural world.
Right.
So should we not claim that faith vocally? I've heard that argument actually
Oh.
made.
I have heard that before,
Yeah.
yeah. I spend so little time listening to it that I hadn't thought about it.
No, you
I see
guys
what
send
you're
me
saying.
out there to deal with
Right,
everybody else.
right. No, there is that claim that because our faith is offensive, we should not proclaim it. That's garbage.
There you go.
Right? That's garbage. I mean, I rush to remind everyone always. It is one thing to be persecuted for righteousness' sake. It is another to be persecuted for being a twit. We should not go and pursue being offensive as though that somehow makes us righteous. I did that when I was younger. I tell those stories a lot. Yeah, that's not. So I think that's why I feel like compelled to always rush to that because
Go to
I'm like,
evangelize just to
right.
pick a fight.
oh my gosh.
Is it where Jesus said, go out, spread the word in the villages, they don't believe, dust your feet off
Right.
kind of thing. Hey,
10.
you can only give it to them, then
Right.
they gotta take a hold of it. You get offended, that's their issue. That's
That's
not
right.
ours.
There is nothing that you can do to keep the world from being offended by the gospel of Christ. You can do your best to mitigate that, to not give a reason for offense. 1 Peter talks about how when you're living in a world that is hostile to you as a Christian, you should do your best to live in peace, quiet, godly, and dignified. The Apostle Paul says to Timothy that he wants everyone to pray for the rulers and the authorities over us, that we can live quiet, godly, and dignified. Peter talks about seeking peace and pursuing it, not to render evil for evil, but rather good for evil, because that way, if we are persecuted, we're only persecuted for the sake of the gospel and not for anything that we've done. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to mitigate the offense, but you're never, ever going to fully get away with not offending somebody. Kim?
Just looking for the one that we're talking about the cross being a defense.
Right.
I found in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul said, for although I am free in every way from anyone's control, I have made myself a bondservant to everyone so that I might gain for Christ.
That's a great passage.
To the weak, I become weak, and
Right.
that I might win the weak and over-scrupulous.
Right. I think you can argue that Paul was one of the freest people to ever walk the earth. Like, he understood liberty maybe better than anybody. He didn't pursue liberty for the sake of liberty. He didn't talk about being free so that you could do just whatever you want. He was free for the sake of the gospel. And so, right, I'm trying to think. There's a phrase from Romans. Well, it's not from Romans. It was from somebody's commentary on Romans. But basically what they said was, grace gives us not just the freedom to be able to do what we want, it gives us the freedom to not do what we want. Right? So, like, you're free to, like Paul was talking about in the end of Romans 14. You're free to eat food offered to idols. You're also free to not eat food offered to idols. You're free to celebrate every day as exactly the same. You're also free to celebrate one day as better than other days. You're free to in a sense, to not keep the law. And you're also free to keep the law. Because you're not keeping the law to gain righteousness. You're keeping the law because you're free to do so for the sake of the gospel and for your brother. That's so huge. And so as Christians, talking about the toxicity thing, as Christians, when we get into an environment where we are subjecting ourselves to the self-righteous, and we're doing it out of a sense of obligation because we feel like we have to, that creates toxicity. But when you walk into a room with people who are immature, who don't have a good handle on their faith, and you choose to restrain your freedom for their sake, it may look exactly the same as that first situation, but it's completely different because now you're acting out of the freedom that you have in Christ, and you're doing so because your identity in Christ is so secure that instead of being affected by their toxicity, you have the ability to actually restore and to cleanse, and Christ through you can begin redeeming them out of their toxicity because of love and grace and freedom. It's a cool picture. You got something on your mind, Lee?
As always.
You look like you had something right on the tip of your tongue.
You know, the amazing thing is when I started the nursing home ministry, a lot of the comments I got is, why isn't my pastor or somebody from the church
Right.
coming in to visit me?
Yeah.
And, you know, I had to deal with that because at that time I had no answer for it. No, but God has showed me not everybody is called to be a visitation pastor.
Right. Right.
You know, a visitation pastor is a hard road to travel.
It's a special
Because
gift.
you get very attached to those people that you're seeing. They become family to you. Their family becomes family to you.
Yes.
And they reach out to you. In many ways, you know, can you bring me in a blanket?
Oh,
Right.
Can you do this for me? Can you do that
Right.
for me? So your heart goes out to them and you meet their needs. Just like God meets our needs
Right.
when we cry out to Him. So you become an intermediary for their faith.
oh,
Right. Right.
And as you become that intermediary, God has to change your heart.
Right.
Because there was a point in my life that if somebody had cried out to me and they were I had shared this with our brother up there, that I was so dead inside. You know, I was emotionally dead at 14 years old.
Yeah.
Then I went to Vietnam, and I didn't come back any the better for Vietnam. And I actually saw a man laying out in a pool of blood on a snowy day, crying out for help, walked over, looked at him, and walked on by and never informed anybody that he was laying there.
Wow.
When God came into my life, that all changed.
Right.
You know, He gave me a heart of compassion.
Right.
And to this day, my compassion is for our elderly. You know, in the nursing homes. Those who can't make it right now because of health issues
Right.
to the church.
Right.
You know, I'll reach out to them by phone or by sending out cards every month. That's just touching base with them.
Yeah.
They know that there's somebody who cares.
Right.
But every card that I write, I say, Pine Run Church is keeping you in our prayers.
Right.
And that means a great deal to them. But like I said, to be a hospice or a visitation pastor
yeah.
is probably the hardest thing you will have to do. But I look at that as I'm taking care of
Right.
the elderly.
Right.
I remember a pastor friend, well, a friend of a friend. He has I guess we can call it mega church. There are 4 digits in his attendance.
Yeah,
So I guess we'd call it a mega
that's
church.
mega-
But it's
mega-
down south, so I don't know if their numbers are the same as ours.
No, that's a different thing.
But he was telling this, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, but once a congregation gets to a certain number, there's only so many phone calls that the senior pastor can take.
Right,
There's only
right.
so many visitations they can do. And in this particular church, there was a family that was going through some marital issues. The wife was ill. She was in and out of the hospital. It was putting a great strain on the relationship. And finally, one of his elders came to him and said, "Listen, I've been meeting with these people every week. I go to the hospital with them. I do all these things. Why aren't you?" He's talking to the senior pastor. "Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you calling them? Where is the church?" And he says, "I thought you were the church." Yeah, I thought you were. So it sounds like the church is doing a great job with them. You're in the hospital with them. You're visiting with them every week. It sounds like the church is really knocking this out of the park. And I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think one of the things that Lee is at least alluding to is this idea that if you know somebody, connected to this body or not, that is at home, can't be visited, isn't getting the proper attention from their family, whatever you think it is, that tells me God's putting it on your heart. So if God's putting it on your heart, he's not doing that so you can pass it on to somebody else. He's saying the rest of Matthew is going to be what? Get the job done.
Get the job done.
So,
that was
yeah,
good end
fantastic.
around.
We have forgotten in the church about the ministry of help.
Yes.
Yeah.
We really have.
Yeah.
God has placed people within the church to, he's delegated in his almighty providence that they're to be doing something.
Yep.
But we see so many of them. They sit in the church Sunday after Sunday.
Taking attendance. That's all they do.
And
I was
that's all
here.
they do.
Yeah, and it's some people. We mentioned it in the class the evening class last week, but some people, you're being called right now to a season of rest. You're being called to sit down, to relax, to let other people minister to you, to let other people pour into you. I think and we're way off topic. I'm going to force drag us back here in a second. But I think what happens so often in churches is that 80-20 ratio. 80% of the work is getting done by 20% of the people, and then they get burned out. And what happens when they get burned out? Exactly. Last week in the Q&A, we talked about there are people inside this building almost every day of the week that aren't us.
Right.
People vacuuming, cleaning, setting up stuff. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
tell you how many times, I won't use his name because I know he gets mad, but a certain adult member of our congregation, I can't tell you how many times I've heard some rustling around. I come out and he's behind the soundboard because something didn't sound right last week on the video. And he's trying to fix it so nobody else is. These things, you guys as members, you're never going to see that work going on behind. And there's some of you sitting here, I realize it's you, and I don't want to use you as examples because you're here, and I never like saying nice things about you when you're around. But the idea is this church is the fellowship, is the congregation that it is because it sees itself as part of itself, not as attendance at somewhere where they're getting entertained.
That is so
a
true.
force pull, we're go ahead because
All right,
we got
fine.
4 more minutes. So I'm going to shotgun 3 questions at you. You pick the one you want, and we'll go ahead.
I'll give you 10 minutes.
You give yourself as long as you want. So, chapter 15, 28, and 16:8, we see a parallel of Jesus addressing people. To one set, he says, "You have little faith." To the other,
Right.
he says, "You have such great faith." So I'd like your touch upon that if you want. 16:1, we see the Pharisees coming to Jesus for specifically to test him. They are now at this point seeking him out to test him, and they give him a test. And then the last one, probably my favorite one, and the one I hope you take, and I'll repeat any of the ones you want, is Jesus' press upon the disciples. Who do people say that I am, and who do you say that I am?
I love that
And how would you apply that to the body today?
Oh, that's good.
So you pick the one you want, take all 3, I don't care, but my job was to have us done in the next 3.5 minutes, and I did it. If you take us past, it's on you.
Didn't. Anyway.
Thank you.
Right. I love the fact that the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to test him. We're going to start there. We'll jump on the other one in a second too. But
Okay.
I love that they came to test him, because you have this thing of like, he's now been ministering for so long that the people are becoming more and more convinced all the time that he's the guy. And the Sadducees and the Pharisees, I think, are growing concerned, because if he's the guy, then that changes everything for them, right? But it's interesting because the word there in the Greek, it says they came to test him. That word in its root is actually the same word that we have in the Lord's Prayer, where in the Lord's Prayer he says, pray, lead us not into temptation, right? The word temptation can be translated as I cannot speak English today, my word. It can be translated as temptation. It can also be translated as testing and agitation. Yeah, like there's all these concepts kind of wrapped up in there. So like when we think of temptation, we usually think of the temptation to do something wrong, like Satan puts temptation in our path to do something bad. And the desire to do something wrong. Yeah, so if you go to like James 1 and he says, when you're tempted, don't say that you're tempted by God, because God cannot be tempted, nor does he tempt anyone. But then you're like, well, but Jesus said to pray, don't lead us into temptation. So if God can't tempt you or won't tempt you, why would he lead you to be tempted? Like, it's just this weird, it's because that word there in the Greek, the way it's translated into English is, there's just a lot of different ways you can kind of look at it. It's like a gem with facets.
The testing of Christ in the desert in many English translations
Is the temptation,
Yes.
right? So
One
the
of
Holy Spirit led him
Muslim-
out to be tempted.
Yeah, one of the quickest verses that a Muslim will point to deny the deity of Christ is James 1, and then compare it to the
That's
40 days.
very good.
Yeah, so Christians, if you're going to deal with Islam, if you're going to deal with Mormons,
I actually like that a lot.
anybody that's denying the deity of Christ and using Scripture to do it, know the difference in what he's talking about right now. Highlight this part of the video,
fascinating, yeah.
whatever it is, because I see so many young Christians, all zeal, no doctrine, running out there and just getting stumped by this and getting crushed by the anti-deity testimony of these other groups.
Zeal without knowledge. I'll tell you guys that story later. That's a good story
Charles.
from my childhood too. All right.
It's like a lunatic with a broadsword.
So anyway, yeah. So when it says that they came to test him, that's that word, and so that's all that stuff wrapped up in there. Like, were they looking to see if maybe he was the guy that he said he was? Possibly. Were they looking to try and trick him into doing something wrong? Possibly. Were they trying to get him to do something that would turn the crowds against him? Maybe. Like, we don't really know. We just know that something is now happening to where they've changed their approach to Jesus from one of antagonistic kind of observation to now a protagonistic type of thing. Like now they're on the offensive. They're like, we're gonna get him somehow. Either we're going to get him to say something that's going to make us follow him, or we're going to get him to do something that's going to mess him up. But now they're on the offensive. And that's just really interesting to me because, like, sometimes attracting the attention of people who are in leadership is not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I don't know what else to say about that. So they came seeking to test him, and Jesus did what he always does. He basically told him to take a hike. I love that. I love that about Jesus. Like, he could have been like, ooh, the important people are here. I need to perform.
Let me impress them.
Right? I need to impress the important people. Then they'll love me. He doesn't ever try and get people to love him based on what he does. He does miracles because he has compassion on the people, not because he wants the people to love him. It's instructive for when we think of our faith, and it's like we come to Christ and we say, Jesus, I'm not feeling well. I want to feel better. Could you please heal me? Or Jesus, my car's broken. I could use a new car, or whatever. Jesus, my family's a wreck, and I really want peace in my home. We come with these prayers, and we take this attitude that like God is obligated to answer our prayers, or worse, that if He answers the prayers, it's because of how much He wants to make us happy. Jesus answers our prayers because He has compassion on us, because He loves us.
Because He chooses to.
Because He chooses to love us. I mean, it's just, and so you have these religious leaders, and they're like, hey, show us something. And He's like, I'm not your monkey. I'm not dancing.
And there's so many rabbit trails I want to go down right now. Like, strategically speaking, if Christ wanted to get the Pharisees on board,
Right.
would it have been hard to grab Ananias and be like, come walk on water with me?
Right.
Like,
So true.
he could have handled it on day
Instead-
one.
Yeah.
But instead he calls a young fisherman.
Right,
He heals a leper.
Right.
He could have went to Caiaphas' house, been like, your joints bothering you today? Okay, you're better now. But instead he dealt with the outcasts and left the important people
Right.
alone. But anyway,
So true. That's really good.
Weren't they stronger in faith?
Huh?
The Pharisees
Yeah, the Pharisees were supposed to be the strong.
well, they were stronger. They were stronger in knowledge.
in knowledge.
Yes, they were much stronger in knowledge. They lacked
Right.
significantly in faith.
The stronger and weaker brother.
Yeah.
They should have been the stronger in
Yeah.
faith. They shouldn't have needed it.
Didn't need it. Okay, so to pull us in, because you actually said something in that answer that transitioned us into the who do you say that I am?
Who do
they
you say that I am?
You said a statement about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, as we'll call them from
Yes,
now on.
the Sadducees for today.
That those two groups coming to see him, and you said they came to see if he is the guy, it changes everything.
Right.
And I think maybe that's the difference in what Jesus is asking his disciples here. Like, the world says I am this, but who do you say that I am? And
Right.
are they
Because-
believing that he changes everything?
Right. And Chuck Colson said that it was the situation with the Watergate that convinced him of the truth of the gospel. Because he said,
I remember.
12 guys, 12 guys who couldn't keep their story straight about Watergate under the remotest amount of pressure. And he was like, there's no way those 12 young men were lying about the resurrection. Like, they would have caved so fast. And he's like, that was, it's funny, but that was the experience that convinced him that there was something reliable about the text, about the gospel. Jesus takes these 12 kids and he gives them the opportunity to be disciples, which obviously they had missed out on up until that moment. He gives them an opportunity to experience crazy stuff. He's already sent them out to do missions work. They've already healed in his name and cast out demons in his name, and they've preached his name. Like, these guys have experienced some crazy stuff already.
Not just him doing it.
Not just him, them.
Participating.
Yeah,
in it,
I
yes.
mean, like, me, we, you, whatever. I can't remember. Anyway, there's a saying there that we'll edit that out because that sounded dumb. Anyway, that guy's got his doctorate. What? Can't even speak. Anyway,
Me do words good.
yeah. So yeah, he did it for them, and he did it with them, and then he sent them out, and they did it themselves. And so these guys have come probably about as far as you can imagine they can come where they're at this moment, right? And Jesus is saying, are you ready? Are you all in yet? Are you all in yet? It's kind of like the story of Israel at Sinai.
Okay.
You know, God shows up to Moses in the wilderness, and he's like, I'm going to send you to my people. So Moses goes to the people and tells Pharaoh to let the people go, and Pharaoh won't let him go, and he sends the plagues, and then finally Pharaoh lets the people go, and they go out celebrating. They've looted Egypt, they've plundered Egypt, and they get to the Red Sea, and then they think they're going to die, and then God splits the Red Sea, and they go through, and God closes the Red Sea on top of Pharaoh's army, and they're celebrating, and they go to Mount Sinai, and then God says, tell the people I want to meet with them, and I'm going to show up on the mountain. And God shows up on the mountain, and there's thunder and lightning and fire and smoke, and the people go, you know what? We've changed our mind. Moses, you go, and we'll just hang out back here. You come back and tell us what he said. It's like Jesus is saying, guys, you've been with me for a while now. We've done some cool stuff together. What's everybody else think? Okay, cool. What do you think? Are you ready for the next step? Are you ready to see what comes next? God did all of that before making covenant with Israel. Jesus walks these guys around. They have no idea what's coming. But he's like, are you ready? You going to hang with me? Because, yeah, if he's the Christ, it should change everything. Of course, you see how much good it did Peter, man. Like 2 verses later. Just think of the logical inconsistency of that.
But then 10 years later.
You're God, but you don't know what you're talking about. Now, when was the last time you did that?
This morning. Well, I do think that that's a fantastic place to wrap up at least the video.
If you enjoyed that video, why don't you hit the like button down below? Or better yet, hit the like button down below and then share that video with a friend. Or better than that, hit the like button, share that video, and then hit subscribe, hit the bell so that you get our updates all the time and this stuff shows up in your feed. If you'd like to be a supporting partner of this ministry, then we would invite you to follow the links in the description below to our giving platform. All gifts are tax deductible because we are a nonprofit organization. If you are close enough, and this is what we would love the most, if you're close enough, come and see what God is doing. How God is building up a community of faith here in this place. A community of artists and educators and philanthropists who long to see what God can do with a people who are fully devoted to Him. We'd love to have you be a part of it. Come, see.